Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this third webinar in our series of 4 webinars about the BRM, about the brand and retail module. And today we will focus on the brand questions related to social performance in the supply chain. And many of you may already know me. My name is Karen Ekberg, and I'm the CEO and founder of Leadership and Sustainability. I have 35 years of professional experience. I'm a chemical engineer, that's my degree, and I come from Sweden, but I have studied in Sweden and in Switzerland. I have also lived a long time during many years in Switzerland, but now since 2009 I live here in Germany, where we are also based with our company. So among others, I have been working at Adidas. That was the reason that I moved to Germany in 2009, and I was responsible for environment globally at Adidas. But I have had other roles managing sustainability at a corporate level previously. And now since October 2015, we are up and running with leadership and sustainability and our consulting and auditing business. And today you will hear from me, but you will also hear from Sila Yeseliurt. Sila, would you like to present yourself?
Thank you, Karin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sıla Yeşilyurt. I recently joined the Leadership and Sustainability team as a Senior Sustainability Manager. Previously, I was leading sustainability projects at the Swedish Fashion Retail Index, and I have spent more than 10 years in the sustainability area. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot, Sila. And let me just introduce you also to the GoToWebinar features. So we are all muted to, or not we, hopefully you can hear us well, but the entire audience is muted today. We have quite a large audience today, and in order to ensure the best audio quality, we have you muted, but you can already now begin to send us your questions in the question box. So you open up the question box, you type in your question, and then you can send it to us. And we will have time towards the end of this webinar to also respond to your questions and take a discussion. And all of you will receive the presentation and also the recording after the webinar. So 1 or 2 days afterwards, we will be sending it out to you. The agenda for today, we will focusing today on the brands section in the Higg BRM and how to manage social performance in the supply chain. So last week we spoke about how to manage environmental issues in the supply chain. So we will be focusing on human rights programs, on grievance mechanisms, on scorecard implementations, how you can do that. Sila will be speaking about that. We will also be speaking about how purchasing practices actually influence also the situation regarding human rights and social aspects in the supply chain. We will also mention a few things about leadership and sustainability and give you an overview about what we are doing, and then we will have time as well for your questions. So let's go there. So we are talking about the Higg Brand and Retail Module and the brand questions about social issues in the supply chain. And as you already know, the Brand and Retail Module is very, very comprehensive. It contains a lot of different sections, and also in every section you have a lot of questions, sometimes a lot of follow-up questions as well. So therefore we have made a selection for today's webinar. We have selected the questions you can see here on the screen. We will be talking about the programs for social rights performance in the supply chain, means of confirmation for suppliers, action plan, and we will also be talking about purchasing practices and how to inform and update manufacturers regularly, just to mention a few of those questions listed here. And then with that, let me move on to the first question we will cover today. And this question is, has your company established a program aimed at mitigating harm and improving social human rights performance in the supply chain? And here what you need to do is you need to have a risk identification process in place. You should also have information on which supply chain segments and tiers that you address in your program. And then you should also inform about your program. And similarly to in the way that it is done in the environmental section for the supply chain, the question about the coverage of the supply chain segments is really important. So whenever you respond yes to a question, you will also get the follow-up question, which tiers, for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and actually upstreams to tier 4. And then you will respond which percentages you cover. So less than 25%, 25 to 75%, more than 75%. And when it comes to the programs, it's really important that companies establish and implement appropriate risk management procedures. And this includes all relevant business processes, the risk identification, the prevention of risks, and in order also, if you ever have breaches, that you can stop them and or minimize them. And of course, also that you have one person who is, at least one person, perhaps it's a very large team you have as well, who is responsible for managing this program. And we have added some resources here for you. You can see the links down here. There are very valuable country reports on human rights practices that you can access, and they are country by country, and they go very deep and give you a lot of information about the situation in the specific country when it comes to human rights. And then there is also a worldwide governance indicators, and you can see on this slide here, you can see an extract from the worldwide governance indicators as it is presented by Amfori in their country risk classification. And you can access that entire document on this link here as well. And here you can see now just an extract. So how it is done is that different dimensions are scored. The 6 dimensions you can see here: voice and accountability, political stability, etc. And they are all scored from 0 to 100, with 0 being the highest risk. So the lower the score, the higher the risk is. And then whenever a country has a score of 60 or lower, it is deemed to be a risk country. Or if that country has 3 or more dimensions of those 6 dimensions here, with a score lower than 60, then it is also deemed to be a risk country. And you can see from the list here, all of the countries listed here at the beginning of the alphabet, they have a high risk. And of course, the degree of the risk you can see here also. The darker the red, the higher the risk. And this is really helpful when you develop your program, and if you want to really differentiate your program depending on the different risks in the specific countries. And then regarding the establishment of the program, so very simple approach. You need to understand the risks, you need to build a program and take action, you need to track your efforts, and you need to communicate and engage with stakeholders. And for those of you who have already worked with an ISO standard for management systems, perhaps ISO 9001 or 14001 or 45001, or for energy management, for example, the 50001, you will see that those steps here are really very much aligned with the process that is outlined in those management system standards. They are all aligned today, and they have a very similar approach. And this is really helpful because if you learn to think along those lines, with understanding your situation, identify your risks, impacts, opportunities, develop your program, taking action, etc. And of course, not only tracking efforts, but also have improvement plans. And of course, then strive to have a continuous improvement. This is a process that you can follow whatever topic you are tackling. If it is in your supply chain, or if it is in logistics, or if it is in any other area of your business. So this means that the process can be applied to any sustainability aspects wherever it is, wherever you need to take care of it in the supply chain. And then regarding social management in the supply chain, there are lots of different programs around, and we have just selected a few of them here. You can see them here. So the ICS, for example, is a program, a French initiative where many French brands are actually using it. We have the Fairwear Foundation, which is also it is focusing on the textile sector and is very popular among mainly smaller brands, but also mid-sized brands. And then we have Sedex and Smita, we have the Amfori with the BSCI, the Business Social Compliance Initiative. And then we have the series of the different Ökotex standards. And for example, here is about chemicals management. So it's not really a social system, but we are showing it because it actually contributes to the label made in green. And then we have the STEP, which is a factory audit program, but that includes both environment and social issues as well as quality issues. And the Made in Green label is a label that a product can get if it has been produced in STEP factories, in STEP certified factories, both tier 1 and tier 2, and if it also has the standard 100 certification. And then, so to say, the overarching label is the Made in Green label. Then we have the guidance for responsible supply chains in the garment and footwear sector. And we spoke quite a lot about the different OECD guidelines in our first webinar last week, when we were talking about the strategy area. And finally, many of you may be SAC members, and there is also the Higg Index, which among others include, of course, the brand and retail module, which is the main topic of today, but it also includes, for example, the FSLM, the social and labor module, which also on the market is called the SLCP, the Social and Labor Convergence Program. And those two programs, they are exactly identical. It's just that on the market, it's called SLCP, and then within the SAC community, it is spoken about the FSLM. And so all of those, they cover then the supply chain with factory audits. Of course, not the guidance, the OECD guidance, since that is a more general guidance document. So that was an overview. There are other programs as well, but those may be the main ones that you may be working with. We have also collected 3 examples about programs where COVID-19 responses have been developed. And we have, for example, Better Work. We have the GIZ, the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationales Zusammenarbeit. And we also have the UNDP program. And you can see here the links to the respective resources, quite rich resources. For example, the UNDP document is a checklist, a self-assessment for brands and retailers on how to deal with your COVID-19 response in your supply chain as well. And then the next question is about, does your company have a means to confirm that suppliers at each tier of its value chain identify, manage, and meet compliance with all applicable local regulations and/or international norms? And here you should again give information about the addressed supply chain segments and tiers. So tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and which percentage. And there are, of course, as I already mentioned, lots of different approaches that you can use, but specifically to this question, for example, the Higg Facility Social and Labor Module, or the SLCP, I also have questions, several questions regarding local regulations. And so you can use that and that verification or audit as well in order to confirm the compliance. And for those of you who have also been working already with Higg FEM, for example, you know that there are also similar requirements within the Higg FEM regarding legal compliance. And then question number 12, does your company have an action plan to mitigate harm and improve the social human rights performance of its supply chain? And brands and retailers here are expected to take action on prioritized human rights risks identified during the risk assessment. And part of these activities should include building the capacity of suppliers within the supply chain to improve their social rights performance. So we are not only talking about verifications or audits, but it's really also very important to ensure that you have good capacity building programs in place. And the requirements here are to upload the action plan you have, and also again to give information on addressed supply chain segments and tiers, so tier 1 to tier 4, and which percentage. And question number 14, this is when the problems start, so to say, when you have issues with manufacturers who are not improving the way that you would expect and that you would like to see. So does your company have an escalation process for manufacturers that do not meet your policy requirements or programmatic goals? And the requirements are that you have a defined escalation process, that you also review and address concerns of potential supplier non-compliances, and of course that you address and remediate confirmed supplier policy violations as well. And we have actually this list continues here. So you will see, for example, what is also important is that you engage your senior management with brand and manufacturer. When it comes to serious violations at a manufacturing site, you need to ensure that you also inform your management and inform the management at the manufacturer that this is the case. And for those of you who work in a sustainability department, for example, one of your very important internal partner would be the purchasing or sourcing department, since they own the relationship with the supplier, and usually they are the ones who decide about the business conditions of the relationship. And of course, when it comes to serious violations, then at a manufacturer, the purchasing or sourcing department should be involved as well. Then you should create a corrective action and remediation plan. You should monitor performance and make sure that that corrective action plan is also followed. And you should begin to plan for sourcing alternatives if it's a really serious condition and you don't see any significant improvement. And of course, you give a warning, create a follow-up plan for remediation. And so you need to be in continuous contact with the manufacturer, perhaps and this says the word even escalation. So this means not from 0 to 100, but perhaps there are several steps in how you escalate this process within your own company and of course also towards the manufacturer. And of course, you need to consider what is your tolerance, what is possible for you to accept, and you may need to engage other brands and retailers if you know that at a specific manufacturer that there are several other brands who also source there. Obviously, you may not be able to discuss the exact business relationship and when to terminate, but regarding improvement actions, for sure, it's possible to collaborate. And in the end, although should of course not be the first step and is generally not recommended, you may need to consider exiting also the sourcing relationship. And if improvement is not made, evaluate also the cost to business, supplier, and right holders, and ensure that workers are also given adequate notice and payment. Would you have to go to that final last step with the manufacturer? And there is also actually some additional guidance available for you regarding exactly this question. Should I stay or should I go? And there is one study, it is from 2016, but it's still very valuable. and there it's discussed and how you should engage in this process and how you should assess the situation. And there are, of course, a lot of criteria you need to consider. So the severity of the adverse impact and the effect or success of previous attempts to prevent. If the manufacturer is not listening at all to you, doesn't want to speak to you about that topic at all, then perhaps that would be a red flag. And of course, the leverage you have over the business partner. If you are a very, very small buyer at that manufacturer, it may be quite difficult to influence. And then, of course, the feasibility of prevention or mitigation, and also the potential adverse impacts caused by the disengagement itself. And of course, we are all aware there are lots of stories, sad stories about the impacts of disengagement. And then, of course, also the significance of the business relationship to you, because it is a business relationship and there are rules. And in most of the time, you would have had your manufacturers sign the contract with you, which includes also the sustainability requirements that you will have. So it's actually would then be a breach of the contract on the manufacturer's side. So it's also a serious topic, of course. And here you can see there is, it's perhaps a bit difficult to read, but you can see that there is a decision chart here depending on the leverage you have. So if you have leverage or if you lack leverage, and then if the business relationship is important, crucial, or if it's less important. And here now, I would actually like to hand over to Sila to speak about grievance mechanisms. Sila.
Thank you, Karin. Okay, now I will continue with the system for redressing compliance and grievance mechanisms. The first question is question 15. If people are harmed by your company's actions or decisions relating to social rights management, is there a system in place for redressing the problem? This question intends to confirm that the company has a system or compliant mechanism in place where any affected stakeholders could raise their questions and concerns directly to the organization. And requirements are compliant mechanisms in place, list social rights addressed in the last calendar year, description of the action taken, did the rate of resolution of compliance improve? And the next question is, does your company ensure that supply chain partners have credible grievance mechanisms in place? This question intended to increase your company's visibility and awareness of the effectiveness of your supplier's grievance mechanism. And this information can be valuable input to your company's due diligence process and assist in understanding the living and working conditions for workers at their factory sites. And for this question, requirements are information on addressed supply chain tiers, monitoring of social rights grievances. And now let's talk about the key elements of effective grievance management. An effective grievance management mechanism is an important social management tool for projects where ongoing risks and adverse impacts are anticipated. And a well-functioning grievance mechanism provides a transparent, credible, and fair process to all parties. It enhances outcomes and gives people the satisfaction that their complaints have been heard, even if the outcome is less than optimal. And a good complaint handling process helps build trust as part of the broader community relation activities and contributes to the overall success of the company's social performance. For companies with environmental and social impacts, establishing a grievance mechanism that manages compliance or business risks efficiently is a good investment. And here are the various business principles and elements of the engagement that are worth considering when establishing a system to address stakeholder compliance and grievances. For anyone seeking to resolve their complaints, the perception of a fair and transparent process is extremely important. Early establishment of grievance management process helps create a foundation for an open, respectful, and trusting connection with stakeholders. Scale to fit the project needs and be relative to the level of risks. Make it simple and accessible to the affected population. Apply risk assessment approach to individual compliance within a grievance mechanism. Publicly commit to a certain time frame in which all recorded complaints should be responded. Record and track grievances. It helps answer important questions about how the grievance was managed. And monitor, evaluate, and enhance the system as frequently as possible. And here you can see the basic grievance procedure. If we start from one, it starts with receiving and registering the grievance. The next step is evaluation and investigation. And after that, you need to decide to act or not. Some complaints may be referred to another appropriate channel. If you decide to act, now it's time to work on the approach and resolution. In some cases, grievances require the involvement of experts or third-party input. The next step is the implementation of the solution and continue the process with monitor, document, and close. And finally, the last step is asking for feedback to learn and improve. If organizations only look at the number of complaints and judge their processes or team on that number alone, the behavior it encourages is for staff to find ways to hide number of complaints. But meanwhile, out there in the real world, the frustration and anger have not gone away. It just keeps growing. The reality is that the majority of projects, policies, programs have negative consequences for some stakeholders. The challenge lies in how we manage those grievances. Instead of just looking at the number of grievances, it would be far more useful to look at how quickly did the team respond to the complaint? How did the stakeholder rate handling of their complaint? How did stakeholder rate their satisfaction with the outcome of the grievance process? Was the grievance management process adequate for the level of the grievance? Are there appropriate checks, balances built into the process? Is the process monitored and audited at a regular basis? You will notice that all of these factors can measure and control, and they are a true indicator of the performance. And the next question is question 17. Does your company have an integrated scorecard that factors social rights criteria into purchasing decision? The intent of this question is to assess whether your company incorporates social rights criteria into the traditional sourcing decision criteria of price, delivery, performance, and quality. This question also designed to determine whether your company has an internal process for assessing and making decisions that include social rights criteria and performance. And here is a reminder about the criteria by SAC BRM. And requirements are internal process for assessing and making decisions, the proof of the implementation plan that shows all listed social rights on the picture. And the next question is, does your company support its manufacturers in improving their social rights management performance? This question is designed to encourage companies to support their manufacturers in the implementation of action plans to improve on social rights performance. And the requirements are information on addressed supply chain tiers, segments, the proof of the implementation plans to improve on social rights performance. Connecting sustainability with commercial success ensures that it stays a top priority for suppliers. I was one of the leaders in the development of Lindex's Sustainability Scorecard from 2015 to 2020. The Sustainability Score is part of the Lindex's Business Scorecard, which is the supplier management tool. This makes sustainability part of the decision-making process when determining where to place Lindex's orders. During my time at Lindex, I have experienced how this kind of support makes a big difference in the outcomes and responsiveness of suppliers. Furthermore, building capacity with your manufacturing partner can encourage innovation and collaboration, which drives further value in the supply chain. And I recommend all brands and retailers to build this kind of system. And now, let me hand over back to Karin.
Thank you so much, Sila. All right, let's move on and speak a bit about the purchasing practices. So this is actually a bit of a new topic over the past few years. It has been recognized more and more by brands and retailers, and of course also triggered by suppliers and manufacturers' reactions that purchasing practices are a really important tool or are really important when it comes to how the social situation and human rights situation looks like in the supply chain. And therefore, we have decided to add some information about those here. And there are also questions in the BRM related to this. So we have added some resources for you. This is a document from the Ethical Trading Initiative called Guide to Buying Responsibly. And it has a lot of rich information about how purchasing practices actually impact suppliers and, of course, the factory workers as well. And so it's important to consider all different perspectives of purchasing practices, like for example, the impact on suppliers, on the workers, the labor market, and on brands and retailers. And you will be able to access this resource here with a link as well. And then we have the Better Buying Project, and they make a rating and ask suppliers to rate their buyers. So this is, of course, a very new perspective to really ask the suppliers and manufacturers to give feedback related to how the brands that buy from them, how they manage their purchasing practices. So, and the criteria that the scoring is built upon is planning and forecasting, design and development, cost and cost negotiation, sourcing and other placement and order placement, payment and terms, and managing the purchasing process, and then how they create win-win sustainable partnerships. So those are really important criteria to take into account. And please go to those websites. We have a link here as well to the Better Buying website. Go and have a look at those two websites and see if you can also engage with your purchasing department in how they actually run their processes. And then we also have a question about training for purchasing teams. Are your buyers trained on the cost of production models? Understanding of the risks and labor costs is one of the requirements, and also identification of responsible buying practices is another requirement. So this really builds upon the Better Buying Guide, for example. And then we have also the question about updating manufacturers regularly. Are they updated regularly and in a timely fashion on changes to seasonal ordering forecasts? And of course, we know that the longer the lead times for the suppliers, the better they can plan their production and make sure that they also can be cost effective in their production. And the requirements are a defined communication process and also internal procedures for purchasing teams. And this was actually the last question we will cover today. And so let me just go and give you a brief overview of leadership and sustainability. So we can support you with a lot of different projects and things in your supply chain. For example, alignment with the Higg FEM, with the FSLM. We conduct materiality assessments over the supply chain, but also at brand level, where we look at the impacts, risks, and opportunities. And for those of you who joined us last week in our two webinars, you will have seen also some elements of our method for our materiality assessment. Then we also develop strategies with brands, retailers, and manufacturing groups as well. We help develop handbooks and guidelines for the supply chain and for the brands, goals and action plans, and we also conduct a lot of webinars and a lot of trainings for about many different topics. And on this slide, you can see an overview of all our services. So not only the supply chain services, which you can see in this bucket here, but also at a brand and corporate level. And also, as I mentioned, with some larger manufacturing groups, we have also supported with materiality assessments over the entire value chain for all sustainability impact categories, and also with developing the sustainability strategies. We also support with the development of reports, sustainability reports, according to GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, for example, and many other different consulting projects in this area. Regarding more sustainable materials, more sustainable products, we have supported several brands here as well. And then finally, as I also already mentioned, the workshops and the trainings that we do with our clients. And you can see some of our team members here on this slide. We have a growing team, and here you will also have the main contact details, my own email address, my mobile phone, and also you can go and visit us on our website via this link. You can subscribe to our newsletter. You can go to our LinkedIn profile. You can go to our Twitter and also to our YouTube and watch our webinars here. And I also wanted to remind you that in 1 week from now, we will have our fourth and last webinars regarding BRM, namely to the topic of operations and logistics and the environmental area. And it will be the same time in 1 week from now, so on May 19th at 4 p.m. Central European time. And a few weeks ago, we organized also a webinar about the upcoming laws in Germany and in the European Union about the supply chain management and due diligence in the supply chain. And you can hear when you click this link, you can access the recording of this webinar. And now, finally, I would like to give you the opportunity to ask your questions to us. And I will have a look here if we already have questions. And otherwise, please feel free to send us your questions now in the question box. No, we don't have any question yet. So if you could, if you have questions, please send them. No questions so far. Okay. There are no questions. Please feel free to reach out to us. Also after the webinar, of course, if you have any questions or if we can support you in any way. And please don't forget to take care of yourself. Stay safe and healthy. Take care of your families as well. And we hope to meet you soon again. And I will say goodbye and thank you everyone for joining. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye bye.
Bye.